A powerful labor union leader stands alone in a suburban restaurant parking lot outside Detroit. He's waiting for a meeting that could reshape his future. Within minutes, however, he will vanish without a single confirmed witness. For decades, Jimmy Hoffa commanded one of the most powerful labor unions in America. As president of the Teamsters, he represented millions of workers and controlled a financial empire worth billions of dollars. But power like that attracts enemies. Politicians feared him, federal prosecutors pursued him relentlessly, and within the shadowy world of organized crime, powerful figures watched Hoffa's growing influence with increasing concern. On July 30th, 1975, Hoffa leaves his home in suburban Detroit for what he believes is a routine lunch meeting with two men connected to the mafia. Before leaving, Hoffa tells his wife he will only be gone for a few hours. He expects to settle a disagreement and return home that afternoon. Instead, it will be the last time anyone close to him ever sees him. What investigators would uncover in the days and years that followed would become one of the most famous unsolved disappearances in American criminal history, a mystery that still fascinates investigators decades later. Welcome to Unimaginable True Crimes. Here, we expose the unimaginable, one case at a time. Long before his disappearance shocked the nation, Jimmy Hoffa had already become one of the most influential figures in the American labor movement. Born in 1913 in Indiana, Hoffa grew up in a working-class family during a time when factory labor was harsh, dangerous, and often poorly paid. As a young man, Hoffa quickly learned the power of organizing workers, helping warehouse employees demand better pay and safer working conditions. His strength was not brute force, but strategy. Hoffa understood negotiation, loyalty, and the ability to mobilize thousands of workers at a moment's notice. By the 1950s, Hoffa had risen through the ranks of the International Brotherhood of Teamsters, eventually becoming its powerful national president. Under Hoffa's leadership, the Teamsters Union became one of the most influential labor organizations in the United States, representing truck drivers, warehouse workers, and transportation employees nationwide. With millions of members and a massive pension fund, the union controlled enormous economic power that reached across nearly every major industry. But investigators soon began suspecting that organized crime had infiltrated parts of the union's financial operations. Federal authorities believed millions of dollars from the Teamsters pension fund were being loaned to businesses connected to mafia families. For years, federal prosecutors tried to prove Hoffa was involved in corruption tied to organized crime. In 1967, after multiple investigations and trials, Hoffa was finally convicted of jury tampering and fraud. He was sentenced to 13 years in federal prison, temporarily ending his control over the powerful Teamsters Union. But Hoffa never stopped believing he would return to power. In 1971, President Richard Nixon commuted Hoffa's sentence, allowing him to leave prison years earlier than expected. However, the commutation came with a critical condition. Hoffa was forbidden from participating in union leadership until 1980. For a man whose identity was built around leadership and influence, the restriction felt unbearable. Friends later recalled that Hoffa became determined to reclaim control of the union no matter what obstacles stood in his way. But powerful figures within organized crime were not eager to see Hoffa return to power. Two of those figures were Anthony Tony Pro Provenzano and Anthony Tony Jack Giacalone. Both men had deep connections to mafia organizations and long, complicated relationships with Hoffa. In earlier years, their relationships had been cooperative and mutually beneficial, but by the mid-1970s, tensions between Hoffa and several mafia figures had reportedly grown dangerously intense. Some witnesses even claimed Hoffa had received threats warning him not to attempt a political comeback within the union. Despite the warnings, Hoffa refused to abandon his plan to reclaim the presidency of the Teamsters. Then, in the summer of 1975, a meeting was arranged that might settle the growing conflict. The meeting would supposedly bring Hoffa together with the two Tonys for a conversation about resolving their differences. The chosen location was a suburban restaurant outside Detroit known as the Mockus Red Fox. The date of the meeting was July 30th, 1975. Hoffa believed the meeting could finally ease tensions and open the door to his return to union leadership. Investigators would later suspect that the meeting might have been something entirely different. Because on the morning of July 30th, nothing about the day seemed unusual to Hoffa or his family. To them, it appeared to be just another ordinary summer day. Shortly before noon, Hoffa left his home and began driving toward the restaurant. He expected a brief lunch meeting and a conversation that might settle long-standing disputes. Hoffa arrived at the restaurant parking lot slightly earlier than the scheduled meeting time. He parked his car and began waiting for the men he expected to meet. Minutes passed as Hoffa stood near his vehicle scanning the parking lot for their arrival. Growing frustrated, Hoffa walked toward a nearby payphone to call home. He told his wife the men he was supposed to meet had not yet arrived. It would become the last confirmed conversation Jimmy Hoffa ever had. The summer afternoon heat hung over the parking lot of the restaurant as Jimmy Hoffa waited beside his car. The meeting was supposed to begin soon, but the two men he expected had not arrived. Hoffa was known for his discipline and punctuality. Being kept waiting was something he rarely tolerated, especially when dealing with powerful figures connected to organized crime. The meeting had reportedly been arranged with two influential men tied to Detroit's mafia operations, both of whom had complicated and sometimes hostile relationships with Hoffa. But as the minutes passed, neither man appeared in the restaurant parking lot. Inside the restaurant, customers continued their lunch conversations, unaware that one of the most powerful labor leaders in America was standing outside, growing increasingly frustrated. Outside, Hoffa stood alone in the summer sun, occasionally glancing toward the road for any sign of the men he expected. At around 2:15 in the afternoon, Hoffa walked toward a nearby payphone located near the restaurant entrance. Frustrated by the delay, he picked up the receiver and dialed his home number. When his wife answered, Hoffa explained that the two men he was supposed to meet had still not arrived. His tone sounded irritated but not alarmed. At that moment, there was no indication he believed anything was seriously wrong. Hoffa told his wife he would wait a little longer to see if the men eventually showed up. After finishing the phone call, Hoffa hung up the receiver and walked back toward his parked car. Witnesses later reported seeing Hoffa standing beside the vehicle, watching the entrance to the parking lot. Then, sometime after the phone call, a car may have entered the parking lot. Investigators believe Hoffa may have approached the vehicle, possibly believing it contained the men he was scheduled to meet. What happened next remains one of the most mysterious moments in American criminal history, because from that point forward, no verified witness could clearly confirm seeing Jimmy Hoffa again. There were no reports of a struggle in the parking lot, and no security cameras existed in the area to capture what might have happened. Within what may have been only a few minutes, Jimmy Hoffa had completely disappeared. But initially, almost no one realized anything unusual had occurred. The restaurant continued serving customers while Hoffa's car remained parked outside. Hours passed, and Hoffa never returned home that evening. As night approached, concern among Hoffa's family began to grow. Jimmy Hoffa was not a man who simply vanished without explanation. The following morning, Hoffa's car was still sitting in the restaurant parking lot. Investigators later noted that the car keys were missing, but there were no obvious signs that a violent struggle had occurred near the vehicle. Soon, local police officers arrived at the scene to begin examining the situation. Not long after, agents from the FBI joined the investigation. Because this was not just any missing person. This was Jimmy Hoffa, one of the most powerful and controversial figures in American labor history. And now he had vanished without leaving behind a single clear clue. Within hours, news of Hoffa's disappearance began spreading across the country. Reporters flooded Detroit, eager to uncover what might have happened. Meanwhile, investigators began asking a critical question. Who had been the last person to see Jimmy Hoffa alive? The answer would soon lead investigators into the shadowy world of organized crime. Several men with both motive and opportunity quickly emerged as potential suspects. And the deeper investigators looked into those connections, the more complex and dangerous the case became. Before we continue, if you've been following this story so far, please take one moment to support the channel. Like this video, turn on notifications, and subscribe to Unimaginable True Crimes. Within hours of Jimmy Hoffa's disappearance, local police and federal investigators began assembling what would soon become one of the most extensive missing person investigations in American labor history. The first step was examining the restaurant parking lot where Hoffa had last been seen waiting. Detectives photographed the area carefully, documenting the exact location of Hoffa's parked car. They searched the ground for signs of a struggle, dragging, or any disturbance that might suggest violence. But the parking lot revealed almost nothing useful. Investigators interviewed restaurant employees and customers who had been present that afternoon. Several people remembered seeing Hoffa standing outside near his car. However, no one could clearly describe what happened after that moment. There were no witnesses who reported seeing Hoffa forced into a vehicle, and no one recalled hearing any argument or confrontation. For investigators, that silence was deeply unsettling. It suggested that whatever happened to Hoffa may have occurred quickly and quietly. Attention quickly turned toward the men Hoffa had been planning to meet that afternoon. Two of the most important names were Anthony Tony Provenzano and Anthony Tony Jack Giacalone. Both men were known to have powerful ties to organized crime networks, and both had long histories of conflict with Hoffa. Investigators immediately attempted to confirm whether either man had actually arranged the meeting. When questioned, both Provenzano and Giacalone denied any involvement in the meeting. They insisted that they had never planned to meet Hoffa that day. Both men also claimed to have strong alibis, placing them elsewhere. Investigators carefully checked the alibis to see if they held up. Surprisingly, several witnesses appeared to confirm their whereabouts during the time Hoffa disappeared. Although suspicions remained, prosecutors lacked evidence tying them directly to Hoffa's disappearance. Investigators then began examining Hoffa's closest associates. One name surfaced repeatedly during the investigation: Charles "Chucky" O'Brien. O'Brien had known Hoffa for many years and was considered part of his inner circle. Some people even described him as a foster son to Hoffa. But their relationship had reportedly become strained in the years before Hoffa vanished. Investigators wanted to know where O'Brien had been on the afternoon Hoffa disappeared. O'Brien told authorities he had been driving around Detroit running errands. He also mentioned that he had borrowed a car that day. The vehicle was a Mercury Marquis owned by a friend. Investigators quickly located the car and brought it in for forensic examination. Inside the vehicle, technicians searched every surface for possible evidence. During the examination, several hairs were discovered in the back seat. Investigators suspected the hairs might belong to Hoffa. The samples were sent to a laboratory for microscopic analysis. At the time, forensic technology was limited compared to modern DNA testing. Scientists could only compare hair samples using visual characteristics under a microscope. The lab reported that the hairs were consistent with Hoffa's hair, but they could not conclusively prove the match. Still, the discovery raised serious questions about Hoffa's possible presence in the car. Investigators pressed O'Brien for further explanations. He insisted he had nothing to do with Hoffa's disappearance. Meanwhile, rumors about Hoffa's fate spread rapidly across Detroit. Some people believed he had been kidnapped. Others believed he had been murdered shortly after leaving the parking lot. But investigators faced a critical problem. There was still no body. Without physical remains, proving a murder would be extremely difficult. Despite that obstacle, authorities continued pursuing leads tied to organized crime. Investigators suspected Hoffa's disappearance had likely been ordered by powerful mob figures, but the mafia's strict code of silence made gathering evidence nearly impossible. Witnesses were reluctant to speak openly about what they might know, and anyone who did speak often provided conflicting accounts. Search teams began combing through areas outside Detroit looking for burial sites. Fields, wooded areas, and abandoned properties were examined carefully, but none of the searches produced definitive results. As weeks passed, the investigation grew increasingly complex. Agents reviewed Hoffa's phone records and personal contacts for new clues. They reconstructed his final movements minute by minute, yet the timeline always ended in the same place, the restaurant parking lot where Hoffa had been waiting. Beyond that point, investigators could only speculate. Some theories suggested Hoffa willingly entered a car with people he trusted. Others believed he may have been tricked into believing the meeting had simply moved elsewhere. Whatever happened next, investigators believed Hoffa never returned alive. Still, without witnesses or physical evidence, the case stalled. Months passed with few new breakthroughs, but investigators remained convinced someone knew the truth. Eventually, new information would emerge years later from unexpected sources. Former mob associates began offering stories about Hoffa's final moments. Some of those stories described hidden crime scenes. Others claimed Hoffa's body had been secretly buried. One theory suggested Hoffa was killed inside a suburban house. Another claimed his body had been transported elsewhere immediately after the murder. If those claims were true, investigators believed the crime had been carefully planned, a plan designed to leave almost no trace. And the deeper investigators looked into those possibilities, the more disturbing the picture became, because the truth about Jimmy Hoffa's disappearance might involve one of the most sophisticated organized crime cover-ups in American history. As the years passed, the disappearance of Jimmy Hoffa slowly transformed from a national investigation into one of the most infamous cold cases in American criminal history. Yet the investigation never truly ended. Detectives and federal agents continued reviewing evidence, hoping that a new lead might finally reveal what happened. Over the decades, hundreds of tips arrived from people claiming to know Hoffa's fate. Some tips came from prison inmates hoping to reduce their sentences. Others came from individuals claiming connections to organized crime families. Many stories suggested that Hoffa had been killed shortly after arriving for the meeting, but almost every theory ended with the same question: where had the body gone? One of the most famous rumors suggested Hoffa had been buried beneath a football stadium. The theory specifically pointed to Giants Stadium as Hoffa's possible burial site. The story spread quickly through newspapers, television, and public speculation. Despite the widespread attention, investigators never found evidence supporting the stadium theory. Another rumor claimed Hoffa had been taken to an industrial crematorium. According to that theory, his body had been destroyed completely to eliminate evidence. But again, investigators could not confirm the claim. Then, years later, a new lead began attracting serious attention. A former mob associate told investigators that Hoffa had been killed inside a suburban Detroit house. The house had once belonged to a family believed to have mafia connections. Authorities decided to investigate the property carefully. Forensic teams entered the house and began examining every room. They inspected the walls, floors, and hidden spaces for signs of violence. Even small traces of biological evidence could reveal what had happened. The basement quickly became the focus of the search. Investigators used chemical testing methods designed to detect traces of blood. Under special lighting, a suspicious stain appeared on the basement floor. The stain was small but unusual enough to concern investigators. Forensic technicians carefully collected samples from the area. The samples were sealed and transported to a laboratory for testing. By this time, forensic science had advanced dramatically. DNA analysis now allowed investigators to identify individuals from tiny biological traces. Investigators waited anxiously for the test results. If the DNA matched Hoffa, it would confirm that he had been killed in that house. Such a discovery could finally provide the evidence investigators had been seeking for decades. But when the laboratory results returned, the outcome was disappointing. The DNA sample did not match Jimmy Hoffa. Another promising lead had collapsed. Investigators were once again left without a confirmed crime scene. Despite the setback, most investigators remained convinced Hoffa had been murdered. The circumstances of his disappearance strongly suggested foul play. But without physical evidence, the case remained unsolved. Authorities continued examining other possible burial sites. Several construction locations were excavated based on anonymous tips. Investigators also searched farmland outside Detroit. Each excavation raised hope that Hoffa might finally be found, but every search ended with the same result: no remains, no weapon, no direct proof. Yet investigators believed organized crime had orchestrated the disappearance. Mob families had both the resources and the influence to carry out such a plan. They also had decades of experience hiding evidence. In organized crime circles, eliminating a problem without leaving evidence was considered a professional skill. Many investigators believed Hoffa had become a dangerous liability to powerful mafia leaders. His plan to reclaim control of the Teamsters threatened enormous financial interests. Billions of dollars from the Union Pension Fund were connected to businesses tied to organized crime. If Hoffa regained power, those financial arrangements could collapse. That possibility may have given powerful figures a motive to eliminate him. According to several investigators, the decision to kill Hoffa may have been made long before the meeting. The meeting itself may simply have been the trap, a carefully arranged moment to isolate Hoffa and remove him without attracting attention. Such a plan would require precise timing and trusted participants. Investigators believed Hoffa may have willingly entered a car with someone he trusted. Once inside that vehicle, his fate may have already been sealed. From there, he could have been transported to another location, a location chosen specifically to prevent witnesses and to ensure the body could disappear permanently. Over time, some former mob members began offering detailed stories. One particular confession would later attract worldwide attention. The story described a confrontation inside a suburban house, a confrontation that ended with Hoffa's death. According to the claim, Hoffa had been shot shortly after arriving. His body was then quickly removed, transported away from the scene before investigators could ever discover it. If the confession was true, it would explain why Hoffa was never found. But investigators still struggled to verify the details. Without physical evidence, the story remained only a theory. Even so, many detectives believed it was close to the truth, because by that point, few investigators doubted that Hoffa had been murdered. The only remaining question was where the crime had actually taken place and whether the final piece of the puzzle would ever be discovered. Nearly 3 decades after Jimmy Hoffa vanished, investigators were still searching for answers to a mystery that had haunted American law enforcement since the summer afternoon of July 30th, 1975. Then, in 2003, a former mob associate made a confession that reignited worldwide interest in the Hoffa investigation. The man was Frank Sheeran, a truck driver, union official, and longtime figure in organized crime circles. Sheeran had also been a close ally of Hoffa for many years. In interviews and written testimony, Sheeran claimed he knew exactly what had happened on the day Hoffa disappeared. According to Sheeran, the meeting Hoffa believed he was attending had never actually been planned. Instead, it was part of a carefully arranged trap. Sheeran claimed Hoffa had been picked up shortly after waiting in the restaurant parking lot. He was then driven to a nearby suburban house in the Detroit area. Inside the house, Hoffa reportedly realized something was wrong. The meeting he expected was not taking place. There were no union leaders, no discussion, only a quiet and empty house. According to Sheeran, the confrontation lasted only a few seconds. Hoffa was shot inside the house. The powerful labor leader collapsed instantly. If Sheeran's story is accurate, Hoffa's murder happened quickly and without witnesses. But the plan had been designed to eliminate more than just Hoffa. It had also been designed to erase all evidence. According to the confession, Hoffa's body was removed from the house immediately. It was placed into a waiting vehicle and transported to another location. Some investigators believe the body may have been taken to an industrial crematorium. If true, that would explain why no remains have ever been found. But investigators faced a difficult problem. Sheeran's story contained details that were impossible to verify. There was little physical evidence supporting his account. Some investigators questioned whether Sheeran was exaggerating his role. Others believed he was finally revealing the truth after decades of silence. The debate over Sheeran's confession continues among investigators and historians, but most experts agree on one conclusion: Jimmy Hoffa did not simply disappear. He was almost certainly murdered, and the motive likely involved power. Control of the International Brotherhood of Teamsters, control of billions of dollars tied to the union's pension fund, and control of the criminal organizations that benefited from that money. For powerful figures within organized crime, Hoffa's return to leadership may have been an unacceptable risk. If that was the case, eliminating him may have seemed like the only solution. By the early 1980s, the disappearance of Jimmy Hoffa had already become one of the most famous unsolved cases in American history. Despite years of investigation involving hundreds of agents and detectives, no one had been formally charged with Hoffa's murder. Without a body or definitive crime scene, prosecutors faced enormous difficulty building a case strong enough to present in court. In 1982, a judge officially declared Jimmy Hoffa legally dead, more than 7 years after he vanished from the restaurant parking lot. For Hoffa's family, the declaration brought legal closure, but it did little to answer the painful question of what had actually happened. Investigators continued reviewing new leads throughout the following decades. Search teams conducted excavations across multiple locations connected to tips from informants. Some searches focused on basements and suburban properties believed to have links to organized crime. Others targeted farmland and construction sites where Hoffa's body might have been secretly buried. Each search created headlines and renewed public interest in the mystery. But again and again, investigators found nothing. No remains were ever discovered, and no evidence was uncovered that could conclusively identify the location of Hoffa's final resting place. Over time, the case became part of American cultural folklore. Jimmy Hoffa's name became synonymous with a disappearance so complete that it seemed almost impossible. Books, documentaries, and investigative reports continued exploring the mystery for decades. Even today, law enforcement agencies still receive occasional tips claiming to reveal what happened. Most of those leads ultimately lead nowhere. Yet investigators believe someone, somewhere, still knows the truth about what happened that summer afternoon in 1975. And for Hoffa's family, the unanswered question remains: how could one of the most powerful men in America simply vanish without leaving a trace? If this story held your attention, like the video, subscribe to Unimaginable True Crimes, and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next investigation. In our next investigation, we travel back to the skies above America in the 1970s, where a mysterious man hijacked a commercial airplane, parachuted into the night with $200,000, and vanished forever. The legend of D.B. Cooper remains one of the most fascinating unsolved crimes in aviation history.